We're rolling.
Okay. Eric, you brought up apostasy several times in the last video, which we haven't posted yet, but it'll be up there. I've did some studies also in the Brit Hadashah about the apostasy, and maybe you can help me carry this through to see that yesterday, today, and forever is yesterday, today, and forever, as far as this theme of apostasy and what it actually means.
Well, apostasies, that almost sounds like a foreign word. I mean, that's hardly even an English word that anybody has in their vocabulary. What do you even mean by apostasy? Why are you bringing that up?
I bring it up because it's a really good witnessing tool for Messianics to witness to Christians who are actually part of the apostasy by definition.
Well, no, apostasy is, in my understanding of the way it feels, I remember hearing a phrase, the apostate church, or something back when I was in Baptist school era. I'm just saying, it's this vague word that's kind of out there, and it basically is like all those backsliders, the people that have turned away from the truth and are looking at other things other than the true gospel message. That's kind of apostasy, and it doesn't have something to do with like the last days of there being some
That's the common
church
thought.
of the book of Revelation that gets corrupt or something.
That's the common thought, that it'd be a last day event. Of course, this was popular when they say, oh, when this man or this Antichrist comes on the scene, this one world ruler, blah, 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 you know, that's when people are going to flock to him and apostatize away from the true Messiah.
Did that have something to do with, there's that guy that wrote the book, The Late Great Planet Earth?
Hal Lindsey.
Hal Lindsey, and wasn't that something about apostasy?
You know, it's been
That was back in the 70s.
20-some years since I read that book, so I have no idea. But Paul said that the mystery of iniquity, or the lawlessness, Torahlessness, was happening in his day. So what seems pretty clear to me is this apostasy that we're being spoken of started off, well, the northern tribes were given a bill of divorce. That's kind of the total apostasy right there. They definitely apostatized. But it's been going on forever. It's not some end-time event. And I think the great falling away that's spoken of in Scripture would probably happen around 321 with Constantine. That's when the mass flux came away from the original teachings of the apostles in the first century ecclesia.
There's another one of those big words.
Well, you don't want to say church. That's not kosher.
But you're speaking Greek. Apostasy is Greek also.
That's true. That's true. Well, his people, his called out ones.
That's the kahal, the assembly.
Kahal. There you go. Okay. Can you give us an overview of what I know it'd be several different, you'd have 3 paleo letters that would have very different variations with additions and subtractions to get a fuller understanding of apostasy?
Well, we had talked about this apostasy, a word. Just for what it's worth, it's in Strong's Concordance, it's 646. It's a Greek word, so
Yeah.
it's only found in the, well, let me put it this way. Strong's Concordance uses the Greek text for the New Testament, the Hebrew for the Old, even though the Septuagint was written Old and, well, the Septuagint was only Old, not Old and New, but essentially you can get a Greek Old Testament, but if you look at Strong's, the Greek letters are only for the New Testament, but it's number 646.
Yeah.
And Strong's Concordance not only tells you where the word is found, but it also gives you a definition. And so you said the word is found in 2 places, right?
It's only found, for how much talk this word gets, it's only found in 2 places.
In the New Testament.
And the context is unmistakable.
You want to find those verses?
Yeah, I've got them written down over here.
Just for what it's worth, the definition in Strong's means a defection from truth, a falling away, or to forsake. But then there's another word that means forsake, which is the Hebrew word ayin zayin bet, also found, and I believe it's 2 Peter 2:15, that it means let go for a price or trade-in value. So this concept of the word study that I do, definitions are only one set part, only one level. I've heard it said all along, ever since I was a kid, that you have to look at context when you're doing Bible translation. And so what they usually mean by that, there's two types of context. One is, here's a page of scripture, what came before it, after it, or the verse before and after. A lot of people will take one verse out and just talk about that verse with its value all by itself. So if you look at the context of the writing, but the other context is the historical context. In other words, who was this verse talking to or about? What was the political or the economic or the cultural scenario of the day? If it was an apostle or a prophet or Moshe or Yeshua speaking, or, I mean, who was speaking to whom and in what continuum of history, where does it fall? That's the other context. But what I've found is that there's more than that to look at context. There's looking at just the words in Hebrew are their own context. The letters that find themselves in the environment of the alphabet itself is a context. The interesting thing is there was I talked about this at Sukkot. There's a word, hey bet yod tet, habit. And if you look in the dictionary, that if you add a tet, so it's hey bet yod tet, it's where we get the word habitat. Habitat is the environment where something is naturally found. You know, the jackrabbit's environment, habitat, is that he lives out in the desert, that type of a thing. So
Your habitat would be the Red Dictionary.
there you go. I'm happy to say so, yes. The point is about this word is that Moshe turned to look at the burning bush. That's the word hey bet yod tet. Yeshua said, if the Son of Man, if he be lifted up, the same way Moshe lifted up the serpent on the pole and the people gazed at it, looked at it, that's the same word, bet yod tet. So that word means to look at the aspect, and my take on what this means, by the fact that it is related to the word habitat, that you don't just look at it, but you see how it fits into its environment, into its context, in the context of him being lifted up like a noon samek, or this bush, samek noon, finds its context within the alphabetic sequence. So to take words and plug them into the alphabetic sequence to find out what they mean is looking at reference. So the interesting thing about this word apostasy is that it directly relates to the word, Strong's Concordance in Hebrew, 7750, 7751, and 52, and it's shin vav tet, where we might get shoot, which means to detrude, derelict, turn aside, or to lash the sea with oars. There's, you get the idea of the oars splashing around, not chaotic, non-directional. It's also to scourge or whip. So just to have a flail that you whip something, and interesting, a related word, shin vav tet yod tav, so now you just have these two other letters as suffix, is the word for a canoe. What's a canoe got to do with it? Well, it's a thin, straight branch, a switch or whip. So if you look at the trajectory of a canoe, typically if one guy is doing the paddling, he pulls on one side, which is going to move the canoe a certain angle, and then he has to do this back correction on the other. So the canoe's constantly maneuvering like this. It's not pulling straight. Like a rowboat could probably keep a straighter. So it's that moving off course. Well, that directly elicits this concept where Yahweh says, walk on the straight path. Do not go to the right or to the left. Don't veer off course. He's telling us we're supposed to do that. And then, of course, that brings up another picture of a reference of the galut, like this revolving door. Gimel Lamed, that's the ones that are sent into exile, and that's the ones that became known as the Celt, who, as you might say, the offspring, the progeny of Israel gone heathen, pagan, gone apostate. The Celtic knot is their claim to fame, the heraldry of their symbolic graphic arts. And that's this twisted course with no beginning, no end, no way to find your way to a solution. And when I was just looking at the graphics of that, I realized it's interesting that what started off as a punishment became something to be proud of. And we've completely lost our way, completely lost that there was a way, and we've even lost that Yahuwah said that as a punishment to Israel, because they turned their back on him, disregarded the covenant, wanted nothing to do with it, kept time after time after time going after the deities, the gods of the nations, rather than forsaking those other deities and just looking to him. They forsook him and went after the other nations. And that pulls us into Jeremiah 3. So he said he was going to let them have their way. And it reads like he is forsaking his people. But in another place he said he'll never forsake his people. What he's done is allowed his people to have their preference, their desire, their wish, and
touch the stove.
Like we talked about the other day. It's like the father says to the son, don't touch the stove. The little kid goes, I'm going to touch the hot burning stove, burns a finger, and it's like, is it the father's fault? And the kid needs to learn to pay attention to the words of the father. And so what's happened is, because he let Israel go destitute, wandering, lost, completely devoid of the covenant, as Fred was saying the other day, you look at history, and as Thomas Jefferson noted, which is why, I believe, why he was a deist, what that means is, it's the belief that there is an almighty creator who made the heavens and the earth, and then he's like, okay, hands off, just watch it happen. Run its course until it runs out of juice, and I guess that's the end of the world. But why does it look like that? Well, we've made some videos before concerning the Song of Moshe in Deuteronomy 32, and it looks like Yahweh's saying there, he was engaged with his people, doing things for them, protecting them, providing for them, and they kept rebelling to the point that he says, you know, I'm just going to back off and see if you notice that I'm not even here. And he says, this is the terms of the covenant. You listen to my words, and I listen to your words. That's the reciprocal engagement. And the way that that's broken is he said, you don't listen to me, in which case now I can't listen to you. Which means that if we're not listening to the Torah, the instructions, our prayers go nowhere.
That's what he said.
That's what he said. And that's never taught.
Proverbs 28:3.
What's that say? You could look it up.
It's saying
Proverbs 28:3. The point is, you know, we like to think that all of our prayers are heard, but if he says, even so, that's the word spelled gimel mem. If you don't listen to me, even so, your prayers are an abomination. And that word gimel mem, gimel mem lamed is the word camel, or that reflective thing.
No, I was thinking Proverbs 28:4. Those who forsake the Torah praise the wrong. Those who guard the Torah strive with them.
Well, there's another one that says,
it's just a few verses below it, 28:9. He who turns away his ear from hearing the Torah, even his prayer is an abomination.
That phrase, even his prayer, that's the word gimel mem. You only have the English there on the computer.
Yeah.
But that word gimel mem means to heap up. And the way you heap something up is like, if you're raking up leaves, you go out here, you got some leaves, you bring them back to the pile. And you go back there and you get some more and you bring it back. And the pile gets bigger and you go get some more and you bring it. So it's this back and forth. That's the reciprocal nature of the gimel, the camel, and this is the word gimel mem. It means even so. It means you keep heaping up this thing where he says, if you don't listen to me, I cannot listen to you. So we think, oh no, he's a nice God, everybody listens. he listened to everybody's prayers, and we don't have to listen to him. We listen to some of his stuff. Other stuff was done away with. We're not smart enough to figure it out, and so we'll just believe what we're told from the preacher, the books, the movies, and it's like, oh, wait a minute, none of that is necessarily his words. His words are written in Hebrew, but
how do they get around with every word that proceeds?
every word that proceeded out of his mouth. Well, I've heard people say, look at when people hear him speaking to them in their mind and their heart, it seems to be in their own language, whether it's English or Spanish or French or Russian. I mean, he seems to speak in their language. But is that true? If our minds interpret everything into our voice, is he really speaking in our language, or is he speaking to our inner nephesh in his voice that we don't even recognize, and so we translate? I'm getting into a mystery, but what I'm saying is the words that proceeded out of his mouth were Hebrew. And I've done a little bit of research and read the works of great minds, incredible intellectuals, astrophysicists, rabbis, extreme scholars of language, and they all say the Torah narrative, or the Bible that's just read as the story narrative, is only a thin surface. And they all agree that the depth of what's in these words is below, you might say, in another level than the surface narrative, and you can't get it by translating. You must look at it in the original language. And the closer to the original, not just Greek, not just Latin, not even Hebrew modern letters, but you get down into, of course they think that the modern flame letters were the original, but I think the Paleo were the original. But the point is, you've got to go to the source to find the root that's at the source. This guy Stan Tenen was finding that there's geometry in the original letters. In the spelling of the word Bereshit, the first word of the Bible, there's an incredible geometry that you cannot get in any other language. It just doesn't exist. And he spent 40 years studying the geometry of the letter sequence in the original language. All that's lost. Besides the study, what it means, the encoded patterns and on, and what he found is that there's a message in the pattern of the letters. Well, if you're not listening to the words that came out of Yahuwah's own mouth, all of that is lost. All of that is missed. And you could say, well, it doesn't matter. What does that got to do with salvation? So the mind that we have, that the salvation concept is the one and only issue of any pertinence, you're allowed to think that if you want. But why are we here? Why do humans exist on the face of the earth? Why does the earth exist in the universe? If you'd like to believe that it only matters whether or not you're saved, then you're welcome to leave it there and go on your way and live your life and see what happens at the end, and I hope you're right. But the rest of this whole study is the embellishment of a human life walking the face of the earth for a short span of 70 to 90 years maybe. And here we are. And you might call it the richness, the depth of life that I've found from what all the great minds seem to say is in appreciating the wisdom of Elohim. The wisdom of Yod-He Vav-He. Something about his wisdom. We don't even know what that is. We don't even know what that looks like. But whatever his wisdom is given to us to be found in his words, in his letters, letter by letter, to the point that some of these sages have said, it doesn't even matter if you translate the words, it doesn't even matter if you break the letters into words, just read the letter sequence, and there's great wisdom, and it's our job as humans to try to decipher and dig through and try to find patterns and try to find meanings and try to figure, what's he trying to tell us? And then if you go astray from that, you're lost. You're gone. You're just out of the game. You're out of the park. You're foul ball. You're just nowheresville. Interesting, this word for to wander, shin tet, or shin vav tet. The name of the devil is shin tet nun. That's where you get the word Satan, which means adversary, but it also means wanderer. And as we mentioned, the book of Job, Elohim, Yahuwah, has this conference up in heaven. All the Melachim, all the angels are coming and talking about what they've been doing. And finally the last guy says, and what have you been doing? And the adversary says, I've been wandering the world, going to and fro. Now why did he say that? Because to wander is to go Shin Tet. And his name is Mr. Shin Tet. Noon, and that noon means the guy that does that. So he was given the job of wandering, and when he said, I've been wandering to and fro, he said, yes sir, I've been doing exactly what you positioned me to do. My name is the Wanderer, and I've been wandering. My job is to wander, to rove about here and there. So he was obeying the law. Even the devil was obeying the law. Imagine that. But the other thing about this word wandering is nod, noon, dalet. Cain, when he killed Abel, he was sent to the land of Nod, which was outside the perimeters of Eden. It's kind of like when you get tired and you nod off and you just go to dreamland. To nod means to wander. He was banished to the land of wandering. Cain was. Same definition. So the point is, if you look at Shin Tet in the Strong's Concordance, number 7846, Shin Tet means revolt or departure from the right. Because Cain departed from doing what was right, he was sent to the land of departure from the right. I mean, it's kind of like we get what we've been wanting. That's the curse. The Israelites didn't want Yahweh's laws, so he gave them the nation's laws and sent them into captivity so they could do what they wanted. So for us to return to his ways is the anti-apostate. Basically, the only way to not be apostate is to go back and find out what Yahuwah's instructions are. The interesting thing, there's about a half a dozen words that are used repeatedly again and again and again all through the Old Testament. And every time, I did this study a while back, that every time Yahuwah got mad at his people, what was his grievance? What's the beef? Where's the problem? He said, you guys, I gave you my stuff and you didn't regard it. This is what he gave them. Chok, it's translated commandment, het kuf, hokim. He gave them Torah, which is instructions. He gave them mitzvot, which are translated kind of as commands, but it literally, the root there is zadivav, which is like a commander of a ship who's giving an instruction to his crew is zadivav. To man a crew is zadivav. And to find out how to do something is mem zadi aleph, or mem zadi het, where we get the word matzah or mitzvot. So matzah literally means find out how to do something. And when you splash your oars about, you're not doing what he said. And then in Daniel 12:4, what he said, many shall wander aimlessly. That's the word shin tet, or shin vav tet. So it's specifically not doing what he said. He also has odot, or ayin dalet vav tav, which is, these are his witnesses. He also has otiot, which is aleph, vav, tav, which are the letters of the alphabet. What I'm saying is that every time Yahweh has something that he's given us to do, there's also mishvatim, the instructions of right rulings. He always describes them with a half a dozen words. And if you study the spelling of those words, you can see what they mean. They're translated law, rule, ordinance, statute, commandment, all this legal heavy burden of iron yokes crushing us, or so we think. Yeshua says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, but yet his yoke and burden was all those things I just read. All those things I just mentioned.
Well, it said the same thing in the Torah. These things are easy. Stuff's not too hard for you.
But if they've been presented as irksome, loathsome, abominable, detestable, and the reason I use those words, Because in Leviticus 26, Yahweh says, if you find my ways to be loathsome, abominable, irksome, disgusting, disturbing, then he says, I'm going to treat you the same way.
Yeah.
So he has told us repeatedly, again and again, he says, the way you treat my words is the way you're treating me.
There's a mirror thing.
There's the mirror thing. He says, I've given you my words, and the way you regard my words, I take it personally. And you may think, oh, I love God, I'm going to sing praises to my God, and I'm going to love him with all my heart, but these stupid words, man, I had about enough of that. That's not his terms of relationship. The terms of his relationship is, the way you treat my words is the way you're treating me. And we've been told otherwise. We've been told that we can have affection and affinity for him in our heart. Forget his words. In fact, if you don't even have a Bible, it doesn't matter. If your language was never translated in the Bible, it's not your fault. So what does that got to do with your words? Well, the thing is, it's a great privilege to get his words. And there are some underprivileged people on the face of this earth who have had never any access to his words. And then, of course, he puts their words in their heart through his ruach, through his spirit. And Yeshua said, go and teach the good news across the face of the whole earth. People, for whatever reason...
And he said making disciples.
The word disciple is where we got discipline, which is the word talmud, talmudim, which means teach and learn. So the word talmud is not a bad word, it's the teachings. The talmudim are the taught ones. The word lamed, so talmud has a prefix letter tav, the T sound. Lamed means teach and learn and rehearse. Go over it and over again. That's the way he's built our brains to function. You hear something again and again, and your neurons in your brain literally build differently. There was a lady that gave a TED talk. She said, I'm going to talk about a subject for 20 minutes, and you're going to hear this subject, and she says, when you walk out of this auditorium, you will physiologically be a different person than when you walked in. Because when you hear about a subject, your neural synapses start forming and constructing a certain way, and now you physiologically are built at a cellular level different than when you walked in the door. So as we go over his words, over and over, reading the story, looking at the dictionary, writing the letters, we are actually constructing our physiological being differently than if we disregard his words or don't even hear. And it's like he has given us this, that we can actually become formed according to his words if we study his language. And then, to turn away from his words, we start disintegrating. So to go apostate, here, I'll read some of these other words. Shin Tet Yod Mem.
Let me give these two.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead and read
real
those.
quick, in case anybody's curious. It's kind of like in Acts 6 where Stephen gets the false accusers against him in regards to Torah. The same thing happened to Paul in Acts 21. This would be verse 20 to 24. It's and the word apostasy is in here. And when they heard it, they praised the master, and they said to him, you see, brother, how many thousands of Yehudim there are who have believed and are ardent for the Torah. And they've been informed about you, that you teach all the Yehudim who are among the Gentiles. Then the word, it's got two words there, three words. It says, to forsake Moshe. That one word there is the first use of the word apostasia, forsaking Moses. Now that's pretty clear.
Now wait a minute. So what you're saying is that the Greek word apostasia, where we get apostasy, was translated, you have forsaken Moses.
To forsake Moses, yeah.
So that's telling us, see, that's not
Then they give examples. He says, saying not to circumcise the children, to walk according to the practices, those things there. So there's no mistaking what he's talking about.
So what it means to forsake Moses is to read the Old Testament instructions given to Israel and say, they're not for us. We don't have to do them anymore. That is apostasy according to the book of Acts.
Yeah. And then the second use, it's only used twice, and this is in regards to the so-called man of sin. Let no one deceive you in any way, because the falling away, there's that word, it's apostasy, and this is in regards to the man of sin, is to come first, and the man of Torahlessness is to be revealed, the son of destruction. That's the only two uses in the Brit Hadashah. Now, I don't see how anybody can mistake that context, but it carries through the same thought that you brought forth through the Tanakh.
Well, now I'm reading on your screen here, 2 Thessalonians 2, 3-4. It goes on past where you read. It says, this man of lawlessness, who is the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called Elohim or that is worshipped. And he sits as Elohim in the dwelling place of Elohim, showing himself that he is God. Now, what this is saying is that to take away the instructions that Yahweh Elohim Zavot, as he calls himself, to take away his instructions
then
and
you got a
replace
man
them.
of sin seated in your temple.
So for anybody to take away the instructions that Yahweh Elohim Zavot gave to Moshe and replace them with a different set of instructions as if they were preeminent, different, changed, more modern, new, that is sin. That is apostasy. That is falling away to try to displace or replace the original instructions with new ones that say that we have no demand on us to regard them. That's replacement theology.
It sure is.
That's serious business.
It's very serious.
That's basically a shipwreck. To not listen to the instructions of the commander telling us where to go and how to get there and how to row, but to go floundering this way and that way, to run aground, to crash. As a matter of fact, going back to this adversary business, the Shin Tet Nun, Yeshua said, let me warn you guys have an adversary. He's real. He has a job. In other words, because he's saying, I am the wanderer, and I've been out wandering to and fro, he said, yes, sir, Mr. Yahweh, I have done exactly what you commissioned me to do, and I will continue to do so. Good. Why don't you go get Job? That's what he said. But Yeshua said he has a job, and his job is, please go out there and devour whomever you may. Now, my take on it is that he may not devour those of us who walk on Yashar Derek, the straight way of Yahuwah that he gave his people Israel. But if you get off the straight path and start floundering around out in the briars, he may devour you, even if you call yourself a believer or saved or a Hebrew national or whatever you want to call yourself. If you get off the path, he is allowed to devour you. And Yeshua said, because if Yeshua is the guy that set the whole thing up, if we want to think of that paradigm, Yeshua is the guy that commissioned the devil to do the eating. If they, it's like keep arms and legs inside the bus. If you stick them out and the bus gets too close to a tree, it'll rip your arm off as you're driving down the highway. That's just the way it works. So the reason for studying the scripture is not because we're trying to invent a religion. We're trying to do a scientific investigation as to how is this place built? How is it designed to function according to the manufacturer's specifications? And we've been told that the instruction manual became obsolete when Yeshua died on the cross. That is not true. What we've been told in the instructions themselves is that our strength, our empowerment, our wisdom, and our health and our sanity, the restoration of our mind, will be when we go back to these instructions. And there has been an ecumenical, you might say, authority for a couple thousand years who keeps saying, don't go back to those instructions. You don't have to, and if you do, we're going to beat you up. And it's like, that sounds like the voice of the enemy. The voice of the enemy telling us not to go back to the source of our strength is because they're trying to weaken us. They're trying to cripple us by keeping us away from the Torah.
They say some horrible things about it, going back under the law, bondage. Oh, you're mocking his sacrifice. How do they come up with this stuff? It's to mock by obeying the sins that he had to die for and put on the tree so he could redeem us, and obeying those things so he wouldn't have to be re-crucified is somehow mocking him. I don't get that.
It's like somebody telling
How do
you,
they turn this around so pitifully?
it's like we've been told that drinking fresh water and good healthy vegetables will make us sick. Well, that's the very remedy that he's provided, built into the system of creation. He gave us the Torah. He gave Moshe true words, letter by letter. Over 300,000 letters are in the Torah, 304,000 something. And we've been told those are bad. Forget it, those are bad.
It was only given to prove that nobody could keep that stuff.
Those are the very words and letters which will restore the kingdom, which will be his pleasure. They are Yeshua. Yeshua himself is the Word made flesh. Do you think he's against these words? He invented these words. He is these words. The greatest thing you can do to please him is to go back and look at his words. That's why I keep trying to encourage people, learn Hebrew. It's easier than you've ever been told.
We're told to walk even as he walked. You can't do that if you kick out Torah. You can't do it.
Okay, this phrase, kick out, what does it mean to do the Torah? What do you mean by, okay, do the Torah, what does that mean? What does it mean to do the Torah?
Well, if Messiah is your example, you're going to study the things he did, live by the words he said, and realize that he was just as much a part of that old stuff as he is the new stuff.
Make it easier. Make it easy. What do you have to do? What does it look like? I want to do the Torah. Tell me what to do.
Well, if I had to recommend or get somebody started on the first path, there's a phrase in there about, when Messiah made the clay and opened the eyes on the Sabbath day.
Okay.
There's a spiritual lesson there.
What is it?
Well, if Christianity could understand the spiritual side of that Sabbath is a day of awakening where he's going to open the eyes.
Wait a minute, I thought you were supposed to sleep and nap on Sabbath day. That's having your eyes closed. Okay, something's confusing. How do you...
We don't have to sleep and nap. It's a rest day. It's a no work day and everything like that. But it's a door. It's a definite door that opens up.
Okay, so what you're telling me is if I choose to change my lifestyle and not work on the seventh day, then my eyes will be opened in a way that I otherwise can't even imagine.
I think if you asked anybody who didn't have any regard for Sabbath and started keeping Sabbath, that's the testimony they give you.
Okay, I'll throw another one out that I
things
found.
started to change when we started obeying this old Jewish stuff.
Something happens when you start regarding the instruction to not work on the seventh day. Something else changes when you start to regard his name spelled in Hebrew letters, Yud-He-Vav-He, that sounds something like Yahuwah or Yahweh, something along those lines. If you start regarding his name, something starts to change. Now, what changes and how you say his name, I'm going to leave that for other people to squabble about. I'm just putting out there that if you regard his name and you regard his day, he also gave us what he calls moedim. Ed means witness and testimony. They're found in Leviticus 23 as a collection of not only the Sabbath day of the weekly regard, but 7 other festivals called appointed times. Moedim are appointed times that bear witness and testimony of his character, nature, and covenant with his people. If you start to regard those, they have exact, instantaneous effect. But the cumulative effect may not be noticeable for some time, for a while, I don't know. But they have effect, just like a drop falling into the lake. I saw one time this still lake, this pretty big pond, one drop of rain dropped, one drop, and I saw those ripples, and they went all the way to the edge. It was probably 100-foot diameter. You know, that one drop had an effect. How much did it register? Well, later the heavy rains came and there was many drops and a big effect, but every drop had an effect. Every time we regard one of his words, every time we regard his name, every day that we regard, every festival we regard, every word that we look at, just like every kindness that we might do to one another, has an effect to the universe, as if those ripples stretched out across the expanse. You started to say something a minute ago. Sorry. What was it?
Oh, you were talking about, Christianity seems like, okay, we're starting here, here's where we are in this church age thing, and here's where it goes. It's just kind of a linear pointing method, where when you're on his cycles, everything is a new experience. Every year you have your Sabbath, you have your feast days, you have everything cyclically rotating, just like the planets rotate and everything like that, where you're not going to get everything this time, but the next time around, oh, okay, I'm getting it more and more, and it's just this wheel, this cyclical wheel, that brings us closer to him. You're walking the path that he walked, you're walking the path that he set up, and all these things are going to accumulate. If you're keeping days like today, it's a day to bring in your green idol from the forest and decorate it with all these abominable things and everything like that. You're not on his path. You're not seeking his ways. You're seeking inventions of your own. That's not going to get you there.
Now, wait a minute. You just said something that was pretty harsh. I mean, you said that if somebody... that sounded like you said that if somebody brings in an evergreen tree and decorates it with tinsel and gold and silver baubles, that you're not on his path. Did you say those words? That you strayed, you went apostate?
These are
those are rough words, man.
Those are inventions of men.
Well, wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. I could say that he didn't tell us to do that. So therefore, if this is his path, if you're doing that, that's not on his path. But can't you be on his path and happening to
just
do some other stuff?
Worship him the way the heathens have set out.
Well, he did say, don't learn the way of the heathens and do it as if you're worshiping me.
That's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean they're worshiping heathens if they happen to engage in the cultural festivities of heathens.
And you say worshiping heathens, learning the ways of the heathens. That's the way the heathens practice and how they worship their false gods. So we're just bring that in, set up a false birth date, and give gifts to one another.
It's okay to give gifts to people.
Sure it is.
But he said, this is the way you worship me. He said, because the word worship is actually ayin bet dalet, which is the word obed, where we get the word obedience, obey. So in like Obadiah, that book in the Bible, but what he's saying by his language is that the way to worship him is do what he said. If we think that we're worshiping him
that's
because
the highest form of obedience,
right.
Worship.
If we think we're worshiping him because we're singing songs to him in our heart, we're loving him by a feeling of affection, in some, let me put it this way, in my mind, as an English-speaking American Christian, that is worship. But according to the Hebrew word, it's not worship. Worship is actually doing what he said. Obedience to his instructions. His mitzvot, his chok, his edot, his torot, his mishvatim. That's worship, according to the language.
We might be running out of time on that card, so we might want to wrap this up. Can you read the time on the card of the North?
43.37.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let me read a couple of these words, because if you look up in a dictionary under Shin Tet, the study of Hebrew is that there's other prefixes, other suffixes, put yods and vavs in between. That's the basic study. So I'm going to read you just a bunch of different words that are variations of the word that's translated simply apostasy. Okay, revolt, departure from the right, to deviate from duty, scourging thorns, to flog, to scourge, or to pierce. Adversary, attack, resist, opposition. Shin Yod Tet is the word for oar and the word for scourge. That's where they say that to splash the sea with your oar instead of using it as directed, that's the word apostasy. Turn aside, digress. It's used in Psalms 40 verse 5 where it talks about those who turn away to falsehood. That's the same word. It means rove, wander, row, or swim. Shin tet, vav tet means wander, rover, rambler. Been a rambling man, I've been a rover and a wanderer. You know, there's songs about that because people think, hey, good old days, times, you get drunk and rove and ramble. Stretch it to and fro, shin vav tet tet, to look about attentively, considering all the other alternatives. Same word. Loitering, vagrant, launched or caused to float, swim, or sail. Like this sailing ship. To sail in a way other than as directed is apostasy. A system, or to systematize. Shin yod tet he, scourge or whip. Then you look at Yeshua being scourged and ripped by the Roman flail. Why? He didn't do anything wrong. He kept the Torah exactly. He took that because we kept, and it's like, well, you look at him getting whipped and yeah, well, so what? And it's like, no, there's a picture in the story. Because we went apostate, he took the beatings of the apostate. So there's a very direct correlation. How to prove that through the language is another part of the study. But I believe it can be proved in the language of the letters, well, het, tet, yod. Those three letters having to do with a sin sacrifice. That's another matter. But anyway, vagrancy, erratic, shin vav tet he, foolish, stupid, silly, idiot, wild, uncultured. To be of the bet of the aleph is domesticated and trained of the house. So Yahuwah's aleph-bet, calling him Abba, aleph and bet, both those letters, if you look at what they mean in the dictionary, the word aleph, the word bet, literally both of them mean taught, trained, domesticated of the house. This shin vav tet is the opposite of being of Abba's household. Accuser, enemy, shin vav tet nun. That's where you get Satan, shin yod tet, swimmer, rower, oarsman. Shin yod tet he is a line of thought where we get the word theory, principle, opinion, doctrine, method, or system. All of which is very similar. It's a synonym of the word hagah, where we get the word goy, and where we get the word navigate, rudder, helm, to spell a word, to think, meditate, ponder. So the system of words by which you navigate your life to find your course of worship, of success, of business practices, the theory, the way you even guide and system, it's either according to Yahweh's instructions of his house or it's apostate satanic. Therefore, any preacher, teacher, apostle, or Messiah that does not validate the Torah of Yahweh is an apostate satanic.
Got the wrong guy.
Causing us to go astray. Shin yod tet tav is a flotilla or a fleet or a squadron of destroyers.
Yeah, we're almost out of
Methodical, systematically. Mem shin tet resh, to write, where we get the word for notary. Officer, one who writes a document. Shin vav tet resh. So to be able to write the spelling of words is a way to keep on track. The reason for reading all these things is to show the word where we get nautical, like the Navy, nun vav tet. It's the steering and navigation. To learn the language is the way to stay on track with Yahweh's teachings. You can't trust your preachers and teachers if they don't show you what's in the Hebrew.
We're done.
We're out of time?
You got about 13 minutes.
Oh,
That'll cut off any time though.
okay, well, go ahead and wrap it up. I'm trying to say this to encourage people to say, you can learn Hebrew, it's easier than you think. There's no excuse. Don't say that it's impossible. Here it is, we're pushing the year 2019, and at this time and place on the face of the earth, to understand Hebrew is entirely possible. It is the correction of what has gone wrong, and if we apply by doing, and even if it starts off, regard his language, regard his name, regard his day, regard his festivals, and his mishpat, do kindness and truth to one another. That is the course of correction.
Hallelujah. And if you can't read Hebrew, just try to do your best and walk like Messiah. All right, you can shut it off, Lenore.
Okay.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Just push the red button again.
Push the red button. Okay.